What is a trustworthy source? The first thing that you have to ask yourself when you are getting into an information evaluation process is why you need the information, because that is going to shape everything else that you do. So, what is a trustworthy source? It depends on the stakes. The higher the stakes are, if you end up stumbling across misinformation, outdated information, or something that's biased, the more it can go wrong, the higher degree of verification is required for the information that you're drawing upon in your personal research. There are some things that you don't need a lot of verification for. They're low stakes issues, and you can use social media sources or you can use Wikipedia, but it's always important to know in your mind, how high are the stakes? What is it going to mean for me if I get this wrong? And that will end up guiding a lot of your source evaluation process, because if you keep in your mind that something is a real serious issue, that will help you steer away from sources that might be misleading. One of the things that is important to say up front is that any source that you are looking at for information, regardless of the need, there is responsibility on you as an information consumer to do your own independent verification. And that is whether or not you saw something on social media, in a newspaper, or in an academic journal. It's still always important to make sure that it feels credible to you. Just because it's published in an academic journal, it doesn't get an automatic pass. There are articles that get retracted from journals. Not all the time, but it does happen. There's a formal process for an article that needs to be removed, which we'll cover later, but it does help to know that you're not in that verification process alone. Some sources out there have formalized processes to make sure that there are multiple eyes on the information before it gets released into the world for other people to use, and that can help to build a level of trust. Academic journals that participate in the peer review process make sure that there are multiple experts that are checking everything before it goes to print, as it were. Newspapers have editorial staff that do the same thing. Ultimately, though, it's not going to be the peer reviewers or editors that are verifying it and giving it trust. You share that burden with these other people, and it's always a good idea to be on the lookout for fake sources, even with academic journals and newspapers. There are things that appear to be legitimate but aren't. So one of the things that is also important to consider, and it goes hand in hand with the "what is your information need" question, is where in the information life cycle are you? Some sources of information are going to be really good at explaining a topic and giving nuance and depth on it, but only after that phenomenon or event has been around for a while. It takes a really long time to get academic journal articles published, even on a really hot topic or issue. Even in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, when researchers were working at a breakneck pace to get that information out there, it still took months to get through the peer review process. There are some workarounds for that. As you can see under the weeks section on the chart, it says academic preprints. There is a variant of the academic publishing process that allows researchers to put their manuscript drafts out in front of the public eye early while it's still undergoing the peer review process. And that speeds up the research process a bit when it comes to communicating developments with the public. But generally speaking, the academic world is quite a way behind the news media and social media, so if it's something that is brand new, you might not be able to rely on some of the types of information sources that are generally considered to be the most reliable. Another example of a topic with a fast-moving information lifecycle is artificial intelligence. There is a huge wealth of academic research on artificial intelligence in general, but if you want to research what's happening with the latest version of ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, which are constantly updating, you oftentimes have to turn to news articles to get the most up-to-date information. So you need to pinpoint where you are and know that it's a cycle. And so something that is really cutting edge right now, tomorrow there's going to be more information, and a few weeks from now, a few months from now, a few years from now. So it's important to revisit these topics again and again over time as information has time to coalesce. So academic journals are publications that are created by academic publishers. They don't have a team of writers on staff like a magazine or a newspaper will, people that are paid to create a certain amount of content per section of time, month or year or quarter. They solicit submissions from researchers and scientists who send in their research papers, and the journal decides whether they want to publish it or not. So it's not like it's a content mill. They're soliciting things from people out in the field. There are academic journals covering every area of academic study, and if you are doing something that is for a school assignment or something that is a very complex issue, like if you're wanting to study a medical condition or treatment, this is where you would go first. Because this is information that has been around long enough that people are able to build on the science as it goes, researchers can participate in a scholarly conversation with other academics where they are working on drilling down to the crux of the issue. However, it is not necessarily the best for anything that is an immediate information need, like cutting edge issues or breaking news, and they don't typically have journals that cover topics that are considered non academic, which can vary widely by discipline. There are a lot of checking and verification measures in place, especially if it is a peer reviewed journal, but it's still important to look out for predatory journals. Predatory journals, put very briefly, are publishers that take advantage of authors. They make their money by telling researchers that they'll publish their stuff and help them get a boost in their career and get visibility, but they aren't really checking to see if the work is quality, and they often get money from these researchers to put their work out there, and it ends up not being very reliable because it's just paid content. Also, if articles end up being proven to not be as high quality as people originally thought, legitimate journals can retract them, but this is a process that takes a lot of time. Here is an incredibly brief overview of the peer review process. As was mentioned earlier, the author submits their article to the journal, and if the journal participates in the peer review process and it thinks that the author's submission is relevant to their publishing parameters, they will then pass it on to a group of peer reviewers. These are people who are subject experts in the same field as the author, so the author's peers. And they will look over this article and they'll ask, is this something that is high quality research? Are the methods used sound and ethical? Is this new information, or is the author just telling us something that we already know? Is this plagiarized? And often they will send the article back to the author, who can revise based on their feedback and resubmit to the peer review group until it is up to the publishing standard. There are various models of peer review where, in some cases, the author's identity is concealed so that the peer reviewers might not be swayed by bias, or vice versa, the identities of the peer reviewers are hidden so that a big-name scientist won't retaliate against them for rejecting their paper. There are also situations where everyone's identity is hidden, and situations where everyone's identity is open. It all depends on the journal. You can look all of this up if you Google the title of a journal, pretend like you are planning on publishing for them, and look through their About Us or Publishing FAQ section. They will explain what model of peer review they use. But after this, the article gets a kind of seal of approval from the author's peers, and then it is published and shared in that journal, which then gets indexed in various academic databases, which you have access to through your library. News sources have, to an extent, the opposite publishing model of academic journals. They have writers on staff that produce content to order. They're on the pulse of current events and politics. You'll also encounter science journalism. Remember preprints where authors will put their not yet peer-reviewed manuscripts out for public comment? There's a whole brand of journalism, science journalism, that goes and looks for those and then writes articles for the public based off of this early results research. They'll also do it for peer-reviewed articles, but if you ever wondered where articles that say, quote, researchers have discovered that chocolate cures cancer came from, it is journalists reading academic journal articles and writing news articles about them. It's always a good idea to try to trace that back to the original article and make sure that the original author is actually saying what the journalist says they're saying. Maybe the author isn't saying chocolate cures cancer. Maybe they're saying that in lab rats, 20% of the lab rats that ate chocolate had a better prognosis than the ones that didn't, but it's inconclusive. News sources are really good for developing events, and especially once you get past that day or two threshold, you can get some good analysis of things as they develop. But accuracy can be tricky, especially if it's something where a political bias might come into play. News sources are, like much of the rest of society, often polarized. And this is true whether it's TV news, print journalism, web journalism, anything. Always investigate what slant this particular news publisher has. And it's always a good idea to look at the same story in several different newspapers so you can start to pick up on patterns. Often there's information that is left out of one newspaper's treatment of an issue but really scrutinized in another, or they'll phrase issues in an emotionally charged way to get their audiences to come to a certain conclusion. Like academic journal articles, newspapers can retract or correct information. They don't always do that, but they can. And there's also the risk of speculation, especially if something is brand new. Sometimes newspapers will publish something that is basically a guess, and they'll have to come back later and walk it back if better information becomes available. Web sources. Caveat up front, web sources is like the miscellaneous category of sources. It includes anything that isn't an academic journal article or a newspaper article or social media. If it's online, it is considered a web source. We have had some students that have asked a question like, my professor won't let me use web sources. Do you have print journals at the library? If it's a journal and it's in a database, that is still considered an academic source, even if it's an online database. A web source is kind of a catch-all term. That made it difficult to place the little magnifying glass marker on the verification chart because there are some web sources that have really high levels of verification. Government-based websites have guidelines or workflows that information goes through. Some nonprofits and other organizations have high levels of verification. Wikipedia has its own system where there's a standard of quality that's required for publishing now. It's kind of cutthroat in some cases. The world of Wikipedians is an intense one, and they do not suffer misinformation to live if they're able to catch it in time. But there is also a risk of bias when it comes to Wikipedia editors because someone is still deciding what counts as misinformation or what counts as a good reference source. But again, it depends entirely on which website you're on because anybody can make a web source, and anybody can make a web source that looks like a more legitimate web source, and then they can pretend to be more legitimate than they are. It's also a really good idea to make sure that the information that you're looking at is up to date because web sources in particular have a problem where if something goes on the internet, it lives there forever. And it might not get updated, especially if there's not an incentive, like with a newspaper to keep publishing new content. You might have some old information that lives on a website for 20 or 30 years. So it's always good to check the publication date, and it's always good to know who created the site and who is maintaining it, assuming it's being maintained at all. You also have to be careful of sponsored content because there are so many sites out there that are trying to sell you something, and they will have an easier time selling you that thing if you don't know that they're trying to sell it to you. So on that note, social media. Huge caveats about social media. Anyone can put something on there on any topic. There is no obligation for people to tell the truth, and in fact, there are algorithms on most social media sites that promote content that is inflammatory, likely to be shared, things that drive their social media account holders towards making certain purchases, whether or not that is good for that person. There have been situations where users that have been determined to be suffering from mental health issues have been promoted advertisements for alcohol. There are a lot of opportunities for shady or unethical practices to be built into the algorithms or to end up there unintentionally. However, that's not to say social media is forbidden. You are not allowed to touch it because we all have information needs that crop up at any time about all sorts of different topics. Not everything we do is for research or for school, and even if it ends up eventually being for research or for school, social media can be an excellent jumping off point. Sometimes you may see a claim on social media about something that you are interested in, and that may spark an idea for a research project that allows you to look into that topic in a more systematic and methodical way. You won't necessarily want to quote the social media post as a source because the original claim isn't verifiable, but it can act as a good jumping off point for you to then go find newspaper articles or academic articles where people have been talking about that topic in a form that has a higher degree of verification required than a TikTok or Instagram video. A few more points of caution. There are so many posts on social media that are sponsored posts that are designed to sell you things, and they do not always have to disclose that. This happens a lot in particular with health information, diet supplements, and all sorts of shady products like that, which get promoted as genuine health advice when they're just ads dressed up in nice clothes. Information isn't just some passive thing that you go find. There are times when you seek information and you find it, but there are other times when information seeks you and finds you. We are living in the age of algorithms, and a lot of what we are seeing is shown to us because somewhere, some mathematical formula has determined that we are an easy mark for this thing. So just a word of caution, because it's easier to train yourself to be skeptical and to carefully evaluate your sources for information when you are aware of the fact that you're looking for information. A lot of students will train themselves to critically examine all of their sources when they're writing a research paper, but they might not automatically turn on that critical awareness and ask themselves, like, why am I seeing this? Is it trustworthy? If it's information that just kind of crosses your social media feed or comes to you linked from a family member or a friend who's sharing content with you, or something that has been in your orbit because one of your friends liked something else. But it's important to know that that is often when the information evaluation process is the most crucial. Why is this information being shared, and why is this information being shared with me are two different questions, but are both very important. Why is this being shared gets down to the issues of why was this created, why was it put online, who made this, and what do they want. But a lot of the time you also need to ask, what is it about me that made this person or this algorithm show this to me? And you might not find an answer to that question because a lot of the algorithms are very opaque about how they work or why they promote certain content or what data they have about you and your habits. But it's important to question it even if you don't find an answer, because if you can't find an answer, that's telling you something too. And it's telling you to be cautious, and it can help you consider, does this make me trust this information more or less? Information hygiene is a fun topic. This terminology came out of the COVID-19 pandemic and refers to the idea that just like you should wash your hands to prevent the spread of germs, you should be careful what you view and like and comment on social media. Because even if you aren't sharing it, a lot of times even likes or comments will push it out to your followers. And it allows misinformation, poor quality information, misleading information, or biased information to spread out to a wider and wider group of people. And even if people in that chain of followers choose not to interact with it, maybe one person on their follower list goes, oh yeah, I totally believe that. They interact with it, share it on, and then it gets really far away from the source. However, if you refuse to interact with content you don't trust on social media, it can't go any further than you. You can become a one-person firewall. So wash your metaphorical hands and practice information hygiene. A presentation on information evaluation wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about AI. It's safest not to treat any generative AI tool as a source for anything. AI tools like ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude are designed to talk to you as though they are a person, and they are designed to create convincing human-like text. They are not required to tell you the truth, and if they happen to tell you the truth, that's a happy accident. They predict text based on their dataset, and they very often do something that AI technologists have termed hallucination or confabulation, which is that they just make stuff up. And if you are not thinking critically about the information that you are being presented, you might just miss it entirely. AI tools are also programmed to give responses that keep users coming back, so consider whether they're just giving you the response they think you want. And also be aware while you're using the internet in general, the evidence or the information that you're seeing might not be created by a person. If you see something really strange or unbelievable, it might be created by an AI. It also might be created by an AI even if it looks super boring. And that gets back to the issue of who created this being a key component of whether or not you can trust something. If it was created by something that has no understanding of the topic and is just creating text based on a predictive engine, can you trust it? And that's a personal question that you have to answer for yourself. So should you only trust academic articles? No, the point is not that academic articles are the best thing ever and you shouldn't trust anything else. But they have their place in the information ecosystem, and it isn't going to meet every need. For schoolwork and research projects, yes, please try to use academic sources, but they can't do everything, and there are some issues that you can't wait for a scholar to write about and then even more scholars to peer review because you may need an immediate answer. So here we are again. Our original question, what is a trustworthy source? There is no such thing as an inherently trustworthy source. The only sources that are trustworthy are those that you have looked at and decided to put your trust in. If it meets your information need and your standards of verification, by all means, trust it. Just make sure that you're going through the process. Not every question is going to require a peer-reviewed article and a bibliography. Trust is something that even the most prestigious academic journals can lose if they start publishing terrible articles that are not well researched. Newspapers that have stood for 100 years and have a great reputation can lose that reputation. It's not something that is inherent to the source. Trust is earned, not granted. So, red flags. For a really long time, people doing information and media literacy trainings would tell people, look for red flags to spot misinformation or fake websites or biased information, and it kind of became a checklist. So one piece of advice that was really common was people would say, .org websites are more trustworthy than .com websites. But basically anybody can register for a .org, and a lot of databases that have academic articles in them have URLs that end in .com. If you're trying to memorize a list of what not to do, it can be really easy for bad information to slip past you. People who are creating terrible content that they want people to share are always getting better at hiding that terrible content and making it look like it is trustworthy. It used to be that fake information websites all looked bad, like they didn't have good graphics because it was just some random person putting it together in their spare time. But that information can come packaged in flashy graphic design, a clean web layout, a nice URL, and it can be really easy to just take it at face value. The point is that you should never take it at face value. You have to train your sense of skepticism and practice information awareness and evaluation, whether you're looking for information or evaluating information that is brought before you by social media, because it's like a muscle that you have to train. It's like lifting weights. You get stronger the more you do it, and if you're constantly practicing it, it's going to be harder for that bad information to get past you. So, a couple of things to keep in mind. You always need to know the full context of information. It's important to know, did I search for this or did it search for me, and who is going to benefit if people trust this? These are just some concepts to keep in mind as you navigate. There is a strategy that we recommend for evaluating information. It's called SIFT, or the 4 moves. The acronym is SIFT, which stands for Stop, Investigate, Find, and Trace. It's a procedure that you go through when you encounter new information. And you can do this whether it is a source that you know you have looked for while you're doing your own research, or if it's something that just kind of gets thrown at you by your social media of choice. And the thing that's cool about SIFT is that you do it in order. But if at any point you are unsure about what you're doing or you find something that is confusing, you can jump all the way back to stop and you pause and you recenter yourself and then you keep going. So you can do it in a line, but it doesn't have to be that you just do it once and then you're done. So I'm going to go through all 4 steps of the moves in order. First, stop. It's one of the most important steps, especially if this is information that is finding you instead of the other way around. Pausing and establishing the facts of what you're seeing in front of you is crucial, especially if it's content that provokes a strong emotional response in you. So just stop and look at the thing in front of you. Try to figure out, what is it saying? Where did it come from? How did it reach me? Does this meet an information need of mine? And again, if at any of the other steps you kind of hit a wall, you can always go back to stop. Next is investigate the source. You're going to be playing detective and looking at whoever created, published, or shared this content, sometimes all 3. If you cannot find information about who is responsible for putting the information in front of you, that's something to pay attention to. There is a lot of anonymous content on the internet, and not all of it's bad, but it definitely impacts the ability to trust them if they don't trust you enough to say who they are, or if they're doing something to obscure where they got their information from. Of course, sometimes you have anonymous whistleblowers and things like that in the news, but that's a different story. For content in general, you should know. Someone should be willing to put their name to it, especially if it's a newspaper article or an academic journal. You should also investigate the publication itself. Look and see if it has a reputation and what that reputation is. You can open up another tab and search for the name of the source and see if you can find somebody else's coverage. And you can also look for any comments or articles that answer, is this person obviously full of nonsense? Are they biased? Are they trying to manipulate me? And just kind of check in with yourself as you go and ask yourself, are my skepticism senses tingling, or am I feeling confident about this? The third step is find other coverage. Sometimes this gets called lateral reading, and again, you are stepping away from the piece of content before you. You are going to see if the information that's being presented to you has been presented anywhere else, and if so, what are they saying? This is going to be really important with news in particular, especially if it's breaking news. If you can't find anyone else that's talking about what should be a really big developing story, that's a sign that maybe it isn't real. As an example, a couple years ago, there was an AI-generated image of the Pentagon being targeted that went viral on social media. And that's something that would be on every single news channel, the radio, the TV. There would be wall-to-wall coverage. People who are information savvy can look at that and go, nobody's talking about this. You'd think if the Pentagon blew up, people would be. It's kind of big. And so having that moment of reality checking and seeing that the source is talking in a bubble by itself can be a good way to ground yourself and not get caught up in the hype or the fear or whatever emotion the creator is trying to cause. It's also good to see if other sources agree or whether there's a debate. It's important to note that even if there is a debate, you're not required to agree with any of the sides involved. You're not required to agree with the majority, but it's important to be aware of the dissenting opinions and other evidence or interpretations that may exist. Also, is any of this information debunked? Are any of the people involved at the head of some sort of terrible scandal? It's just good to know the history of the claim and what's happening outside of that specific container that is that source. And then finally, trace back to the original context. This happens a lot with video. Someone on social media will share a small clip of a piece of video and it's completely devoid of its context and it ends up being really inflammatory. They do this on the news too. But if you've managed to find the full video, it tells an entirely different story. The same is true with quotes that have been pulled out of context and used to support something that is completely contrary to the original meaning. Statistics are really bad about this. It's like the example of chocolate curing cancer. In mice, sometimes, and they're not really cured, all the hand waving, that becomes chocolate cures cancer because that claim gets clicks. But if you trace it back, you'll see no, that's not true, and also who's doing the sharing as it goes. So just try to see how far back you can trace it. Figure out who the original creator is, investigate them, see if you trust them. All 4 of these moves kind of help you understand what it is you're looking at because you can't have informed trust in something if you don't know who made it. We do have a lot of resources at the library that are at your disposal for research. You can find one search on our homepage, which allows you to jump into almost all of the academic databases and find peer-reviewed journal articles. We also recommend working through the Credo Information Literacy course. It gives you in-depth training on all kinds of research skills if that's something you want to learn more about. There's also a specific course for health science research. If you're an instructor, talk to us if you want to embed Credo in your course in D2L. And please don't hesitate to reach out to the research and instruction librarians. We are also resources for you. We love talking about this. We love helping students and professors with their research. We can help you navigate sources, but we can also give a second opinion about a source being trustworthy or not, and it can be good to have a second set of eyes. If you're an instructor, we can come talk to your students and do some variation of this presentation for your students so that they can start thinking about information evaluation. Here are some references that were used for the creation of this presentation if you would like to learn more about the 4 moves or information hygiene or anything else that was covered. This is a good opportunity to practice tracing claims back to their original context. And finally, we'd like to acknowledge several colleagues whose work served as the basis for this presentation. Thank you for watching.